I paid $5,000 for a stranger to hold my hand in front of the men who controlled my hockey career, fully expecting to feel nothing but the cold, familiar sting of shame. I was 34 years old, a veteran captain of a professional franchise, and my entire life was built on a foundation of carefully constructed ice that was rapidly cracking beneath my skates. If you have ever felt like you had to buy the safety you could not find naturally, you know exactly how heavy that secret gets. Before I get into the exact moment my entire fake reality shattered, drop a comment letting me know what city or country you are listening from. It actually really helps me feel less like I am just talking into the void. All right, let me take you back to the locker room. The smell of ammonia and stale sweat was always the strongest after a loss. I sat on the wooden bench, staring at the scuff marks on my skates. The arena was empty now, the fans long gone into the freezing December night. My left knee throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that matched my heartbeat. The heavy metal door creaked open, and our general manager walked in. He did not look at me directly at first. He looked at the whiteboard, then at his expensive watch. "Marcus," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "The ownership group retreat is next week in Aspen. I need you there. And Marcus, do not show up alone again. The board is talking. They want to see stability. They want to see a family man they can invest a 5-year extension in. Find a date. A real one." He turned and walked out, leaving the door to slam shut behind him. I sat completely still. My lungs felt tight, as if the air in the room had suddenly been replaced with freezing water. The owners knew I was gay. It was an open secret among the elites of the organization, a tolerated reality as long as it was completely invisible to the press and the fans. But this retreat was an intimate, week-long pressure cooker of wives, girlfriends, and traditional family values. Showing up alone, again, meant I was a liability. Showing up with a random hookup meant I was reckless. I needed someone impeccable, someone who could navigate the venomous, passive-aggressive corporate sports culture without flinching. I unlaced my skates slowly, my hands trembling. I drove back to my empty house in the suburbs, the silence of the large rooms pressing down on my shoulders. I sat on my leather sofa, opened my laptop, and stared at the glowing screen. I typed in words I felt sick even thinking. High-profile, discreet companionship services. The results terrified me. I spent hours reading through polished websites until I found an agency that catered exclusively to public figures. No escorts, no sex. Specialized social fixers. I filled out the intake form. I need a companion for a week-long corporate sports retreat. High scrutiny environment. Need someone who understands athletic pressure and can project absolute calm. I hit send and closed the laptop, dropping my head into my hands. The next morning, I received a secure file. 3 candidates. One caught my attention immediately. Silas. Former sports physical therapist. Left the medical field to manage private clients. Expert in high-stress social navigation. His photo stopped my breath. He had dark, intelligent eyes, a strong jawline, and a completely neutral, steady expression. He did not look like someone who was trying to sell himself. He looked like a man who could stand in the middle of a burning building and calmly point out the exits. I booked him. The agency handled the massive deposit. 2 days later, my doorbell rang. I opened the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Silas stood on my porch. He wore a simple, perfectly tailored dark wool coat. He was exactly as tall as me, and up close, his presence was incredibly grounding. "Hello, Marcus," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, and entirely lacking the nervous energy most people had when they met a professional athlete. "Hello, Silas," I said, stepping back to let him in. "Please, come in." We sat down at my massive dining table. Silas did not look around at my trophies or the expensive artwork. He looked only at me. He placed a leather folder on the table and opened it. "Before we travel together, we need to establish absolute clarity," Silas said, pulling out a pen. You are paying for my time, my conversation, and my social protection. I will pose as your partner. I will hold your hand if the situation requires it. We will share a room, but we will not share a bed. There will be no sexual intimacy. If anyone asks a question that crosses a line, I will deflect it. If you feel overwhelmed, you give me a signal, and I will extract us from the conversation. Do you understand these terms? I swallowed hard, staring at the paper. Yes, I understand. I just need to survive this week without losing my contract. Silas leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. He looked at me with an intensity that made me want to look away, but I could not. Marcus, he asked softly, do you want them to see the hockey captain, or do you want them to see you? The question hit me like a physical blow. I felt a sudden, sharp ache in my throat. I want them to see someone who is not afraid, I whispered. Silas nodded slowly. Then that is exactly who they will see. 3 days later, we arrived at the lodge in Aspen. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, burying the massive pine trees surrounding the luxury resort. We walked into the grand lobby, my shoulder brushing against Silas's arm. Our general manager was already there, holding a scotch glass. He looked us up and down. Marcus, he boomed, stepping forward. And who is this? I felt the familiar panic rising in my chest, the instinct to apologize, to shrink. Before I could speak, Silas reached out and rested his hand naturally on the small of my back. It was a warm, firm pressure that instantly anchored me. I am Silas, he said, extending his free hand. Marcus has told me a lot about the vision you have for this franchise. It is a pleasure to finally put a face to the strategy. The general manager blinked, caught off guard by the confident, commanding tone. He shook Silas's hand. Well, yes, glad you could make it. Silas smiled politely. I would not have missed it. Marcus is deeply committed to this team, and I am deeply committed to him. The lie sounded so beautiful it physically hurt my chest. That night there was a formal dinner in the main dining hall. A long wooden table under heavy antler chandeliers. The room was loud, filled with cigar smoke and the harsh laughter of wealthy men. I sat stiffly, pushing food around my plate. Across from us sat the majority owner, a man known for tearing players apart just to see if they would cry. He leaned over his plate, locking eyes with me. So, Marcus, the owner drawled, you are getting older. Knees are going. How long do you really think you can keep up with the kids on the ice? What is the backup plan when the body fails? I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. The entire table went quiet, waiting for me to stumble. Silas casually placed his fork down. He did not rush. He took a sip of his water, then turned his dark eyes toward the owner. The body does not fail if it is managed correctly, Silas said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the silence. I spent a decade in sports rehabilitation. Marcus's biomechanics are stronger now than they were at 25 because he plays with intelligence, not just momentum. You do not invest in a captain for his top speed. You invest in his ability to control the pace of the game. And right now, no one controls the ice better than him. The owner stared at Silas for a long, heavy moment. Then, slowly, he laughed. A real, booming laugh. I like this guy, Marcus. Keep him around. I let out a breath I had been holding for an hour. Under the table, out of sight of the room, Silas shifted his knee until it rested gently against mine. He did not say a word, but the contact was a lifeline. I felt a terrifying, unfamiliar emotion rising in my chest. Gratitude. And something else. Something much more dangerous. After dinner, we retreated to our suite. The room was massive, dominated by a huge stone fireplace and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark, snowy mountains. I collapsed onto the edge of the sofa, letting my head fall back. My left shoulder was screaming in pain from tension. Silas walked in holding 2 bottles of water. He set them down and looked at my posture. "Rotator cuff?" he asked. I opened my eyes. "Yeah, old tear. Flares up when I am stressed." Silas walked over and stood behind the sofa. "Sit up straight," he commanded gently. I obeyed. I felt his hands press into the thick muscles of my neck and shoulders. His fingers were incredibly strong, finding the exact center of the knot. He pressed down hard, and I let out a sharp hiss of pain. Breathe through it, Silas instructed, his voice low and calm. Inhale for 4, hold for 2, exhale for 6. I followed his rhythm. As the tension slowly released, my body went boneless against the cushions. His hands moved with professional precision, but there was an undeniable intimacy in the quiet room, just the sound of the crackling fire and my own heavy breathing. Why did you leave sports therapy? I asked, my voice slightly raspy. Silas did not stop working the muscle. My younger brother was in a severe car accident 3 years ago. Traumatic brain injury. The medical bills wiped out my parents' savings in 4 months. The insurance company fought every claim. I needed a massive amount of cash, quickly, and I needed total control of my schedule to be at the hospital. This work pays exactly what I ask for, and it lets me protect my family. I felt a lump form in my throat. You sold your own life to buy his back. Silas paused. His thumbs rested against my spine. I did what a brother does. It is not a tragedy, Marcus. It is a choice. He stepped back, breaking the physical contact. I felt cold where his hands had been. The pain in your shoulder should be manageable tomorrow. Try to get some sleep. The rest of the week passed in a blur of forced socialization, but I was no longer afraid. Silas was a shield of armor. By the time we boarded the private flight back home, my contract extension was verbally secured. I should have been thrilled. Instead, as the plane touched down on the tarmac, a crushing wave of grief hit me. The contract with Silas was over. We stood in my driveway next to his car. The winter air was biting. Silas handed me a final invoice. You did incredibly well this week, Marcus, he said, his tone perfectly professional. You have the extension. You are safe. I stared at the piece of paper, then at him. I do not want to be safe anymore, I said, my voice shaking. I want you to come inside. Not on the clock, just you, just Silas. Silas looked at me, his dark eyes entirely unreadable. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the snow catching in his eyelashes. I cannot do that, Marcus. My chest caved in. Why? Because I am your job? Because mixing paid companionship with genuine emotion is how people get destroyed, Silas said, his voice tight, losing its professional calm for the very first time. I like you. I like you entirely too much. But I will not be a transaction that you blur into a romance. It is unethical, and it will ruin what we built this week. Then what do we do? I begged, entirely abandoning my pride. Silas reached out and gently gripped my arm. You go inside. You wire the final payment to the agency. You close the account. And then, when you are no longer my client, you call me as a man, and you ask me out on a real date. He let go of my arm, got into his car, and drove away. I stood in the freezing driveway until the taillights disappeared. I ran inside, opened my laptop, and wired the money immediately. I sent a formal email terminating my account with the agency. Then I sat on the floor of my kitchen, my phone in my hand, watching the clock tick. At exactly 6 in the evening, I dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. Hello, Marcus. Hi, I breathed out. Are you currently employed? I am unemployed, Silas replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Good. Do you want to go to the community ice rink tonight? The one that closes at midnight. They leave the back door unlocked for the kids. Let us break in. A soft laugh came through the speaker. Pick me up in 20 minutes. I drove to his apartment building in the city. He walked out wearing old jeans and a thick, worn-out sweater. No armor. No professional mask. We drove to the old community rink. The lights were mostly off, casting long, dim shadows across the scarred ice. I laced up a pair of battered rental skates for him. We stepped onto the ice together. The freezing air echoed with the harsh scrape of steel blades. Silas was clumsy on skates. This man who moved with absolute physical perfection on land was suddenly vulnerable, gripping my arm as his skates slipped sideways. I caught him by the waist, pulling him flush against my chest to stabilize him. We stopped moving. The silence of the empty arena wrapped around us. His hands rested flat against the front of my jacket. I looked down into his face, illuminated by the faint exit signs. "I am not paying you right now," I whispered, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I was sure he could feel it. Silas looked up at me, his gaze dropping to my mouth and then back to my eyes. "No, you are not." "Then I am going to kiss you," I said. Silas exhaled a shaky breath. "It is about time, Captain." I leaned down and pressed my lips against his. It was not a tentative first kiss. It was an absolute collision. All the suppressed tension of the mountain retreat, all the careful boundaries, all the professional distance, shattered completely. His hands slid up to grip the collar of my jacket, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. The cold air rushed around us, but I was burning alive. We stood on the ice for hours, just talking, touching, learning the real versions of each other. Over the next 8 months, we built a life in quiet, deliberate steps. I played the best hockey of my career because I finally had a home to return to that was not just an empty house. Silas slowly wound down his agency work as his brother's medical debts were finally cleared. One evening, we were sitting on the floor of my living room, eating takeout directly from the cartons. Silas had a notebook open on the coffee table, sketching out architectural floor plans. "What are you drawing?" I asked, leaning over his shoulder. Silas put his pen down. "A dream," he said quietly. "A dedicated athletic rehabilitation clinic for underprivileged teenagers in the city. Kids who blow out their knees and lose their scholarships because their families cannot afford the surgery or the physical therapy. I want to build a center that treats them for free." I stared at the intricate sketches. The detail was incredible. He had thought of everything. "Let me fund the initial construction," I said instantly. Silas stiffened. He closed the notebook. "No, Marcus. We talked about this. I am not trading one dependency for another. I am not your charity case." I dropped my chopsticks and turned my body fully toward him. "You are not my charity case. You are my partner. I have millions of dollars sitting in a bank doing absolutely nothing, while you have a vision that could change hundreds of lives. I am not buying your clinic for you. I am investing in the man I love. Let me stand beside you, just like you stood beside me in Aspen." Silas stared at me, his chest rising and falling heavily. The defensive wall in his eyes slowly crumbled. He leaned his forehead against my shoulder. "Okay," he whispered into the fabric of my shirt. "Okay, we do it together." 2 years after that terrible night in the locker room, I took Silas back to the community rink. The clinic was fully funded and opening in a month. My contract was secure, and I was preparing to announce my retirement on my own terms at the end of the season. We stepped onto the ice, the same dim lighting casting shadows around us. Silas skated a little better now, but he still held my hand for balance. We glided to the center face-off circle and stopped. The air was perfectly still. Silas looked at me, his dark eyes reflecting the faint overhead lights. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, scuffed velvet box. My breath vanished from my lungs entirely. "Marcus," Silas said, his deep voice echoing slightly in the massive, empty space. "2 years ago you asked me to protect you from being seen, but all I have ever wanted since the moment I walked into your house was for the whole world to see exactly who you are. You are the bravest man I know. You gave me my life back. Now I want to spend the rest of it making sure you never have to hide again." He opened the box. Inside rested a thick, hammered silver band. It was rugged, unpolished, and completely perfect. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice breaking on the last word. Tears spilled over my eyelashes, freezing almost instantly against my cheeks. I dropped to my knees right there on the hard ice, looking up at him. "Yes," I choked out, grabbing his hand. Yes, absolutely yes. Silas dropped to his knees in front of me. We knelt on the ice, entirely alone, completely unseen by the world, and completely known to each other. He slid the heavy silver ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. I grabbed the lapels of his coat and pulled him into a desperate, laughing kiss. I traded a fake contract for a real life. I paid a stranger to be my shield, and he ended up being my entire world. What do you guys think? Would you have risked your career for someone you paid to meet? Let me know down in the comments, and do not forget to subscribe if you want more stories like this.